The universe never plays favorites. We are so used to the thought that if we mix certain colors, we get certain other colors, that we do not realize we are dealing with a principle. We know that whoever blends these particular colors will get the same result, but we do not know why. The wisest man living does not know why. We do not have to stretch our credulity anymore in metaphysics. We think of metaphysics perhaps as something that only the most profound thinkers have known about. But we should remember that we also are thinkers. The profound thought of all ages has stood in awe of life itself, realizing that here is a power and potentiality, the highest possibilities of which the human intellect cannot fathom. Universal principles are never respecters of persons. The universe has no favorites. Therefore it is written, "And let him that is athirst come, and whosoever will, let him take the water of life freely." Revelations chapter 22, verse 17. Nothing supernatural about the study of life. Let us then approach the science of mind, the science of spiritual psychology, with awe, but not with fear, with truly a humble thought, but not with a sense that we are unworthy. Let us approach it normally, happily, willing to accept, glad to experiment, hoping and believing that as the result of our efforts we shall each derive a great good, a sound understanding of the natural laws of life as they apply to the individual and his relationship to the whole universal scheme of things. This is the simple meaning of true metaphysical teaching, the study of life and the nature of the law, governed and directed by thought, always conscious that we live in a spiritual universe, that God is in, through, around, and for us. There is nothing supernatural about the study of life from the metaphysical viewpoint. That which today seems to us supernatural, after it is thoroughly understood, will be found spontaneously natural. We all know that many have been healed of physical disease through prayer. Let us analyze this. Why are some healed through prayer while others are not? Can we believe that there is a God who picks out some man and says, "I will honor your prayer, but I do not think so much of Mr. So-and-so"? It is superstitious to believe that God will answer the prayer of one above another. Jesus said that God maketh his sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and sendeth rain on the just and on the unjust. Matthew chapter 5, verse 45. Since some people have been healed through prayer, while others have not, the answer is not that God has responded to some and not to others, but that some have responded to God more than others. Their prayer, their thought, has responded by corresponding. The answer to prayer is in the prayer. But what is a prayer? A prayer is a movement of thought within the mind of the one praying along a definite line of meditation, that is, for a specific purpose. What is the mind? No man living knows. We know a great deal about the mind, but not what it is. By mind, we mean consciousness. We are now using it. We cannot locate mind in the body, for while the body is a necessary vehicle for consciousness while we are here, it is not consciousness. We cannot isolate mind. All we know about it is not what it is, but what it does, and the greatest philosopher who ever lived knows no more than this, except that he may tell us more of how it works. There are not two minds, only two names. Mind, the thing, spirit, causation, is beyond and yet not beyond our grasp. Beyond in that it is so big. Within and that wherever we grasp at it, we are it to the extent that we grasp it. But since it is infinite, we can never encompass it. We shall never encompass God, and yet we shall always be in God and of God. Mind comes under two classifications. There are not two minds, but rather two names employed in describing states of consciousness: the objective, or conscious, and the subjective, or unconscious. We think of the conscious state as our conscious use of mind. The subconscious or subjective state of mind, sometimes called the unconscious state, is that part of mind which is set in motion as a creative thing by the conscious state. In the body of this textbook, under the heading of subjective mind, we say, in the subjective mind of man, we find a law obeying his word, the servant of his spirit. Suggestion has proved that the subconscious mind acts upon our thoughts. It is the mental law of our being and the creative factor within us. It is unnecessary at this point to go into all the details of the subjective mind and its mode of action. It is enough to say that within us is a mental law working out the will and purposes of our conscious thoughts. This can be no other than our individual use of that greater subjective mind, which is the seat of all mental law and action, and is the servant of the eternal spirit throughout the ages. Limitless power at man's disposal. Marvelous as the concept may be, it is nonetheless true that man has at his disposal, in what he calls his subjective mind, a power that seems to be limitless. This is because he is one with the whole on the subjective side of life. Man's thought, falling into his subjective mind, merges with the universal subjective mind and becomes the law of his life through the one great law of all life. There are not two subjective minds. There is but one subjective mind, and what we call our subjective mind is really the use we are making of the one law. Each individual maintains his identity in law through his personal use of it, and each is drawing from life what he thinks into it. To learn how to think is to learn how to live, for our thoughts go into a medium that is infinite in its ability to do and to be. Man, by thinking, can bring into his experience whatsoever he desires, if he thinks correctly and becomes a living embodiment of his thoughts. This is not done by holding thought, but by knowing the truth. Within us, then, there is a creative field, which we call the subjective mind. Around us, there is a creative field, which we call subjective. One is universal and the other is individual, but in reality, they are one. There is one mental law in the universe, and where we use it, it becomes our law because we have individualized it. It is impossible to plumb the depths of the individual mind, because the individual mind is really not individual, but is individualized. Behind the individual is the universal, which has no limits. In this concept alone lies the possibility of eternal and endless expansion. Everyone is universal on the subjective side of life, and individual only at the point of conscious perception. The riddle is solved, and we all use the creative power of the universal mind every time we use our own mind.